I'm joined by James Bevan. He's Chief Investment Officer at CCLA, where he oversees $10 billion. James, good to see you. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming in. So before we get into earnings season, US equities, I actually wanted to start by asking you about the Church of England threatening to pull its $6 million investment in Rupert Murdoch's News Corp over this phone hacking scandal. Can you explain to me a little bit about that decision?
Absolutely. I think everybody is repulsed by what's been happening at News of the World, and that's obviously shared by News Corp itself. The real challenge, I think, is whether News Corp has genuinely addressed the challenge of what happened at News of the World simply by closing it. And frankly, we're very disgruntled collectively as to the way in which News Corp has handled this. After all, it knew about the phone hacking all the way back in 2006. It didn't take appropriate action. And we're very keen to ensure that management now demonstrate that they're on top of the case, they're taking appropriate remedial action, and they stand up for what they've done and accounted for it.
From what we know at this point, I mean, the regulatory process for the acquisition of BSkyB is still in motion, though we now know the Culture Secretary is getting Ofcom, the body that monitors UK broadcasters, and the Office of Fair Trading involved. From what we know at this point, do you think it's likely that the acquisition will be allowed to go ahead?
I think it will be much delayed, at least, because after all, no one is going to say that this is a simple way through. And I think prior to the most recent revelations, everybody said, yeah, well, sooner or later, they'll be allowed to acquire the 61% that they didn't already own. And that clearly is now much more in the balance. This whole challenge, though, as to whether News Corp ultimately will be defined as an entity that is fit and proper to own BSkyB, I think really hangs in the balance in terms of what the executives of News Corp knew or didn't know or should have known about what was happening at News of the World.
So from what you're saying, James, it doesn't sound as though you think this crisis will be contained, so to speak, to just the News of the World. You're saying closing down the News of the World doesn't make any difference. You know, there is this sort of threat of contagion to the other businesses within News Corp.
Well, it's certainly not the end of the chapter. I mean, I think what is very clear is that there will probably have to be one senior head that rolls, because there has to have been an individual who did not undertake the appropriate oversight of what was going on. Now, whether that's
you don't think
Brooks or Mr. Murdoch, I don't know.
Les Huntman, the CEO
He's certainly been
Dow Jones division,
put in a... Well, he was in charge at the time, and therefore clearly he was an individual, and people will be saying he should have known, he should have taken action.
Would that be enough for an investor like yourself?
We want to see a broader review of the way in which News Corp operates, the nature of management controls within the organisation. We're very keen for organisations to put their hand up when there are problems and say, yes, we've made an error, we can now move forward because these are the steps we're going to take. That's what we want from News Corp.
OK, now, moving on, I want to talk about US earnings season. What are your expectations? I know that you like US equities right now. Which industry groups are you focusing on?
Well, we like US equities on a valuation rather than earnings angle, and therefore what we're looking at are, first of all, the global plays like Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, some of the domestic plays, such as American Electric Power, but also some of the drug companies, because we look at Eli Lilly offering a very high yield and a very low multiple. We see all of the risks in the price, none of the upside potential. OK,
so you like companies with exposure to fast-growing emerging markets. And do you think, then, that this gap between valuations and earnings growth is likely to continue?
I think it will continue until sentiment begins to improve. What we can see, however, companies saying their shares are too cheap by engaging in a very significant program of buybacks. And that process of buybacks is now running at twice the average that has been in place since 2007.
What about the skeptics? Because I guess they would point to, poor economic data, weak jobs report we had recently, concerns about Europe's debt crisis, inflation in China, and so on.
There are lots of negatives, and that's actually why prices are so depressed.
Okay.
And of course, as a true contrarian, you have to buy when prices are low, the news is bad, and be prepared to sell conversely when the news is extremely good and prices are very rich.
Excellent. Thanks very much indeed. Great to get your thoughts on that. Thanks very much indeed, James Bevan, Chief Investment Officer, CCLA Investment Management.